It is unthinkable. A quiet rural corner of Nova Scotia staggering under the weight of a despicable crime.
An RCMP officer, a teacher, healthcare workers, parents, and their 17-year-old daughter were a few of the people killed over the weekend during a 12-hour shooting rampage in Nova Scotia. And 2 days later, a fuller picture of what happened that night is starting to come together.
This happened in small towns. Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield are places where people have deep roots, places where people know their neighbors and look out for one another. Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them.
On top of losing their friends, colleagues, and family members, these communities are grieving in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, under lockdown, unable to physically come together and mourn this massive loss of life. It's still early and the RCMP hasn't made much information public. They're still piecing together what happened at 16 crime scenes across the province. My guest today is Global News' Alex Quon. He's based in Halifax and he's been covering this. And since we talked this morning, the RCMP said they now believe there are 22 victims, so keep that in mind as you're listening to this. Today, everything we know about the mass shooting in Nova Scotia, the deadliest in Canada's history, and all the questions that are still unanswered. I'm Tamara Kendacker, and you're listening to Wait, There's More. Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for doing this. So there's obviously a lot we still don't know at this point, but take me through what we know about what happened, starting with when the police first heard about this on Saturday night.
What we know so far is that police received a couple 911 calls from the Portapique area in Nova Scotia. It's a town of about 100 people, about an hour and a half northeast of Halifax. It's cottage country and like a lot of cottages up there as well and temporary homes. So it's a small community, a tight-knit community, and there were reports of gunfire. Police responded, and from there it gets a little bit, the picture gets a little bit more sketchy. But we have been told by neighbors that at around 11, they saw a number of house fires around them. Police would arrive, they heard gunshots, and then they were told by the RCMP to go back inside.
And so when the cops first arrived on scene, what did they find?
They found a number of bodies, both inside and outside of the crime scene. We haven't been given details on exactly how many people were dead at that scene, but they do say it was a number of bodies. They didn't find the suspect at the time. They would identify him later.
The suspect had fled the scene, and that's when a manhunt ensued for a man considered armed and dangerous.
This was a very quickly evolving situation and a chaotic scene.
We are told by police that they pursued their suspect throughout the night into the morning hours. At one point, the gunman, Gabriel Wortman, is believed to have been wearing at least part of an RCMP uniform and driving what looked like was a mock-up of an RCMP vehicle. So the details on where exactly he went and the timeline of it is, again, a little bit iffy. Police haven't provided those details at the moment. We have talked to a number of people that were located on the kind of path that this man traced as he went across Nova Scotia doing these shootings. A lot of them say they found out through social media or they found out through a phone call. A lot of them say they were left scared and kind of confused about what was going on. All they were really told at the time was that it was an active shooting investigation and that they needed to stay inside their homes, lock their doors, and go into their basements.
It's a bit surreal. Even people on the other side of the river are scared. Nobody wants to come out of their houses. We don't even know if the shooter's been caught or not.
And those were through a number of communities, basically on the way towards Halifax. And they followed and pursued him through a number of communities. We know from tweets that the RCMP sent out as they were carrying out their manhunt for him that he was believed to be in Wentworth at one point, and that he was believed to have traveled through Debert.
I did go to Debert today and spoke with residents there who too are shaken up about this tragedy. One man in particular I spoke with, though, he wanted to remain anonymous, but he said that the shooter paid him a visit on Sunday morning, came onto his property. He saw him get out of the vehicle with a rifle and come to his door. He says he's not sure what spooked him, but he eventually left. He said he believes he was a target, and he says that he's happy to be alive today.
And then gotten onto Highway 102, which is the main highway leading to Halifax, and then somewhere along that route, just outside of Enfield, that's where he had his final confrontation with police.
I woke up to the sound of gunshots and didn't know what was going on until I looked out my back window and I saw 3 bodies laying there.
You saw 3 bodies laying there?
Yes.
What were the bodies, men, women?
There's 1 male cop, a female cop, and 1 civilian.
Wow, what was that like for you to see that?
It was shocking. I still don't know what to think.
We don't have the details on that right now, but it ended up with Wortman being shot and killed by police. The investigation into that has now been handed over to the Nova Scotia, the independent police watchdog. They're handling that investigation, and we don't really expect any details around that to be released until they're done. What we know so far is that the altercations began in Portapique. Police have told us that there are about 16 different crime scenes spread out through northern and central Nova Scotia, covering a vast kind of space of the province. We're not entirely sure where all of those locations are. Police haven't told us that. Some of them are burned out houses, which have yet to be fully processed and examined by police investigators, and that's expected to happen over the coming days.
And how did he manage to get away for so long and travel the distance that he did?
Police have told us that they believe the reason he was able to evade them for so long was because he was in a vehicle that looked like an RCMP cruiser. They believe he was able to travel for a while in that vehicle.
His ability to move around the province undetected was surely greatly benefited by the fact that he had a vehicle that looked identical in every way to a marked police car.
But beyond that, they haven't really disclosed when and why they discovered that he was traveling in that vehicle.
Right. So essentially he was traveling around it in what looked like a police vehicle, and he was able to go undetected from one crime scene to the next.
That is correct.
And how did he get this car? I've heard that this car looked pretty much identical to a real RCMP cruiser.
When we talked to Commissioner Lucky, she said the same thing as multiple other RCMP officers who Global News has spoken to, that they were astonished by how realistic the suspect's homemade fake police cruiser looked. I asked the commissioner if even an experienced officer like her might have mistaken it for the real thing.
Oh, absolutely. If I had seen that vehicle on the street, I don't think I would have been able to tell the difference.
So the RCMP, in their tweet that they sent out, they said that there's one difference between his car and the actual RCMP vehicle, and that's the car number. It's located behind the rear passenger window on the vehicle, and it apparently is different from what an actual RCMP cruiser would have had. It looks like any other RCMP vehicle that you would have seen, driving on the road anywhere. What we've been told is that Wortman had a passion for fixing up old police vehicles, but police have yet to confirm anything so far.
So the RCMP has said that in excess of 19 people have died and the death toll is expected to go up. Why is that?
They still have to process some of those crime scenes, which include the burned out homes. They expect some more bodies to be in those buildings. I believe at this time, they haven't exactly said why they expect the death toll to rise.
We're relatively confident we've identified all the crime scenes. However, we've been unable to fully examine the crime scenes because, for instance, we have had 5 structure fires, most of those being residences, and we believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
And do we know anything about what his motive might be at this point? Have police said anything about that?
RCMP haven't said anything about what Gabriel Wortman, what may have motivated him to do this. We know that he had some relationships with some of the victims, but we also know that other victims had no relationship with Wortman at all.
But RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki did tell Global that we don't know his motive, but that it may have changed partway through.
We have nothing to indicate a motive yet. We believe that obviously there was a motive in the initial stages and it may have turned to something random, but that's just guessing.
So what do we know about this guy, Gabriel Wortman?
So what we know, Gabriel Wortman's 51 years old. He was a denturist that owned the Atlantic Denture Clinic in Dartmouth. It's a building that if people have driven through downtown Dartmouth, they would have recognized it has a large set of smiling teeth on it. So it's a very, well-known building.
A clinic believed to be owned by Wortman was surrounded Sunday in yellow crime scene tape, as was the entrance to Portapique Beach Road. It's believed the suspect owns a home there.
My sister knew him because he's a denturist, and she just had new teeth made by him, and she thought he was salt of the earth.
We know that he had a conditional discharge of assault. That was a couple years ago in 2002. There's no details on that incident. And then recently, we know that he had an encounter with Halifax police over an unmarked police vehicle that was in the parking lot of his denture clinic. But details on that, again, haven't been released by police. A lot of people have said that he was quiet, that he was nice, but that he kept to himself quite a bit.
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. Like I said, he was just, and it's cliche, right? I mean, you see this all the time when there's a murderer, the neighbors say how quiet and friendly he was. He was.
At this point, a lot of the neighbors that knew him best weren't willing to speak on the record about their interactions with him at all. A lot of them are still obviously very shaken up about what's occurred in their community. We know from property records that he owned a number of properties in Dartmouth and then in Portapique as well.
Okay, and it sounds like he also had a bit of an obsession with the RCMP and collecting police memorabilia. What's that about, and when did that start?
Well, we have a few details. We have seen his high school yearbook, and it is a quote saying that Wortman would make a good police officer, a good RCMP officer. Other than that, we know that he collected or at least restored old police vehicles. But beyond that, and his obsession with police and his knowledge around policing, details are still coming out.
We'll be right back. We don't know the names of all the victims yet, but I know they included teachers, small business owners, nurses, prison guards, an RCMP officer who was killed in a shootout with Wortman. Tell me about some of these people who were killed.
So, the first person whose name was released to the public was Constable Heidi Stevenson, a member of the RCMP who died while responding to the shooting. She was a 23-year member of the force, and we've been told that she leaves behind 2 children and a husband. She used to be the point of contact for a lot of the media here, so many of the reporters who are covering this story knew her fairly well.
Heidi answered the call of duty and lost her life while protecting those she served.
Lisa McCulley was a teacher at DeBert Elementary School. We know that she was one of the people that was killed. Heather O'Brien and Kirsten Beaton were 2 Victoria Order of Nurses that were killed.
At a time when we're praising nurses as heroes, 2 are being honored. Heather O'Brien and Kristen Beaton both worked for the Victorian Order of Nurses, which today described O'Brien as a wife, mother, and grandmother who shared her deep caring of others as a VON nurse for nearly 17 years. And Beaton, a continuing care worker, as a caring and compassionate member of the Victorian Order of Nurses team.
We also know that Sean McLeod and Elena Jenkins were correctional officers as well.
Sean McLeod worked at the Spring Hill Institution for more than 20 years, and Elena Jenkins at the Nova Institution for Women in Truro.
I know there was also a family of 3 who were killed, including the youngest victim, a 17-year-old named Emily Tuck. Can you tell me about her and her parents?
So the family to us include Aaron Tuck, his wife Jolene Oliver, and their 17-year-old daughter Emily Tuck. She was apparently a talented musician, and her father was well known for his passion for leatherwork. She was sharing videos of her playing music. And trying to use that as a way to cope through the current COVID-19 restrictions around being out in public and seeing other people. You know, the fact that this incident occurred while Nova Scotia is dealing with pandemic restrictions, and that is definitely something that is playing into the emotional outpouring of grief for people here in Nova Scotia.
Usually after something like this, people will grieve together, and there are large public gatherings where people mourn the people who died. And this happened after the Toronto van attack and the Quebec mosque shooting, but that can't happen now because of these social distancing rules. So how are people grieving?
So right now in Nova Scotia, there's restrictions on gatherings of more than 5 people in the province. And we've been told by health officials, including the Chief Medical Officer of Health in the province, that restrictions won't be relaxed.
The province's Chief Medical Officer of Health says he knows that is difficult to hear.
While we want to mourn victims and come together as communities, we need to do that in a way that does not create an environment for COVID-19 to further spread. I know that the RCMP and the victims' families do and will appreciate the outpouring of support that is coming their way, but we cannot have people gather together as part of showing this support.
So people have been finding creative solutions to mourn together, to process this kind of grief as a group. There will be apparently a virtual vigil scheduled for Friday. It's organized by people in the community around Portapique. There's also a number of people who have been sharing candlelight vigil photos from their front porch. So those have been circulating on social media as well.
You don't have to go far to see markings of a community in mourning. Flags lowered to half-mast, a family placed hearts on trees lining their property for passersby to see, and just down the road in Debert, a sign thanking RCMP with the message Colchester Strong.
Yeah, I know Lenore Zan, who's the local MP for that area, she said that the lockdown to prevent the spread of COVID-19 had exacerbated the horrors of the violence.
We're already feeling vulnerable because of COVID-19, and then you add something like this onto it. It really shows you the fragility of existence.
What else have people been saying? What have leaders been saying? Talk to me a bit about the mood in the community right now.
It's definitely left everybody here in the province, not just in the direct community around Portapique and where these shootings occurred. I think it's left the entire province reeling. Most people are shocked that this has happened, especially during a time where many people are restricted from seeing their loved ones. You know, the Premier Stephen McNeil called this one of the most tragic incidents in the province's history, and other political leaders have been expressing their thoughts and their condolences.
My first thoughts when I heard of this tragedy yesterday and saw the numbers climb in terms of victims, my first thought was for Nova Scotians who, for the most part, know each other so much. They are such a connected group.
I think this morning, Queen Elizabeth also sent out a statement issuing her well-wishings for the people of Nova Scotia, and the White House has issued a statement as well last night about the shootings.
And what about funerals for those who've died? How are those going to be carried out? Are there going to be funerals?
That's a good question. Details are still being worked out. There will not be any exceptions to the 5-person maximum rule. So funerals will be held, but what that will look like for people is still up in the air.
And what's next in this investigation?
That's a good question. We don't know what comes next. A lot of people, I think, are waiting to find out. There's still so many crime scenes that are being processed, so many questions that have been left unanswered at this time, and we're hoping that those come in the next few days.
I gotta say, it seems like a really frustrating lack of detail from the RCMP at this point when the shooter is dead and there's been at least 19 people who were killed. They're not telling the public much at all.
I think it's frustrating not just for journalists. I think it's frustrating for a lot of people who want answers, who want to know what has happened in their community, especially because this isn't just an incident that was contained to one place in this province. It spanned, 90 kilometers and came fairly close to the major center of the HRM. This has affected a lot of people, and they really just want to know how this happened and what caused this. So I think it's a frustration felt not just by journalists, but I think by many people in the community.
Thanks, Alex. I'm sure we're going to be talking more as we get more information, and thanks for your work on this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's the show. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Tamara Kandaker, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.